Right, now let's talk about, well, what is in the future for us if there were a Labour government, as the polls seem to suggest, particularly in terms of the culture wars. I mean, predict without much money to spend, will Labour be returning to the culture wars, whether it comes to trans rights, whether it goes to gay rights, whether it goes to race issues, critical race theory and others. We'll be talking about that right now with Eric Kaufmann. He's a professor of politics at the University of Buckingham. He's also author of a book called Taboo: How Making Race Sacred Produced a Cultural Revolution. Good morning to you.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating article you wrote in one of the Sunday papers yesterday, looking at a lot of these issues. Race being a very, very big one coming up. And again, there's been lots of movements about this whole diversity, equality, and inclusion, and it's all trans and sex and race as well. Do you think we are facing now what will be an explosion in these theories, not just in schools, in universities, like where you teach, and in the workplace as well? And how much is it going to impact us?
I think, unfortunately, yes. Buckingham, where I teach, is probably going to be the one island of sanity, but basically, yes. And I think a lot of this is going to happen under the radar. So you can already see with Labour, the strategy there is to sort of do things quietly and to deflect any attention from these subjects by saying, oh, this is just the Tories stoking the culture war. And we're concerned about cost of living. And it's worth saying that this set of beliefs called woke, which I'm going to define in a minute, is in the DNA of left-wing parties like New Labour. So what does woke mean? In my book, I define woke specifically as the making sacred of historically marginalized race, gender, and sexual identity groups. From that flows two principles. One is equal outcomes, let's say by race and sex. That means that's what's called diversity and equity. Yeah. The second part of this
effectively means quotas.
It effectively means anti-white and anti-male discrimination. The second part of this is inclusion, which effectively means censorship of speech, which might offend any of these groups. So we get speech censorship and discrimination coming out of that. Now, you look at what Labour's announced. They've talked about their Race Equity Act, that they're going to bring in corporations are going to have to monitor the race and sex characteristics of their workforce and report on that. So if they aren't showing the right numbers, they're going to be pressured to discriminate and have quotas. The second thing they're doing is they are sort of weaseling around this idea of essentially gender and trans ideology. They're sort of saying, well, we don't know what we're going to do on withdrawing the Tory guidance that you're not allowed to essentially teach school children that there are many genders and it's a choice. And in a way, the problem with that, of course, is it encourages social contagions around people wanting to change genders. So as well, we also see, by the way, they're going to make it easier to change your gender officially. Yeah. And again, that's another move in this direction of trans ideology, but it's part of this package. Making sacred of historically marginalized race.
But even part of the language around that, Bridget Phillipson was talking about the indignity for people having to, produce evidence they've been living in a different gender. It's like, what's undignified about this? We're always told people are being treated without dignity or dehumanized or unpersoned, which is, a complete nonsense. And again, it's all about, victimhood.
Well, yeah, that's right. Whoever has more oppression points, and so biological males who identify as female are seen as having more oppression points than women. They are maybe a jack, and women are maybe a 9 or a 10 in the pack. So that this is really.
You're a white man. So you're a 2. You've got nothing. I've got at least I tick one box. I'm a woman, but not the right boxes. Again, I'm the wrong kind of woman because my views are incorrect apparently. But this is the thing. Yeah. We've seen this creep up. 14 years of Conservative rule. One of the things a lot of people are saying they're angry at the Tories for is that this has all been happening under our noses. It's happening in our schools. It's happening on our universities. People losing their jobs. Huge amount of work the Free Speech Union does. 40% of it is dealing with people going, sorry, men can't become women. Like literally the most reasonable, factual statement that people could make, and losing their jobs as a result. People have to be quiet. We've seen this in all of our workplaces. You see this in everything, BBC. You see it in children's programming, in music. It's literally the NHS, cervix havers, for goodness sake. It is imbuing every part of our culture, and it's happened for the last 14 years under a Conservative government. How much worse can it get, a lot of people might be asking?
I think that it can get worse, and the reason is, I mean, it's true that the Tories really didn't, they did something. I mean, you had speeches, at least the mood music from people like, Kemi Badenoch and Oliver Dowden, and there were a few voices that made it clear, and even belatedly some bits of legislation like that guidance on gender in schools.
Yeah, but only guidance.
It's only guidance, but at least there was this perception that the higher ups don't like this. And between the press and the higher ups, I think it provided some kind of a check. Now, the signal is, hey, restraints are off, the leash is off, you've got a green light, you can go crazy. That's what I worry about. It's not going to be Labour necessarily doing anything,
no,
but it's subtle signaling to the minions and the radicals in these institutions. I've worked in universities for 25 years. These people need a rationale to go that next step, right? So if they can point to this new Race Equity Act and say, well, this requires us to do X and Y,
we have
they
to
will be able to prevail.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's what happened, by the way, with New Labour as well, with the 2010 Equality Act. I mean, that unleashed a lot of this.
What is the motivation behind this? I mean, say you're at University of Buckingham now, where they enable and protect free speech. One of the few universities doing that these days, it would appear. But what is the rationale behind all these people? What do they genuinely believe? That every white male is an oppressor and every black female is a victim, no matter what. I mean, do they honestly believe this, or is it? I mean, I think a lot of people are grifting a lot of the time. Frankly, there's money in them. There are DEI hills. A lot of people making a lot of money going, speaking at events and getting on their HR gravy trail. Do they actually believe what they say?
I'm afraid that most of them do, actually, Julia. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. There's something called a mandatory diversity statement, which means you have to pledge political loyalty to this ideology before you'll be considered for a job in universities or getting research grants. By a 2-to-1 margin, academics largely support that. So it is, and that's on a survey where no one's looking over their shoulder.
That's anonymous.
They're not getting any
that is
benefits.
McCarthyism. I mean, that's literally, you are required to say, but of course you're a good person if you think that. If you don't agree with it, then you're a bad person.
Exactly. And the same with affirmative action quotas. I mean, they are supported more than they're opposed on a survey by people in by progressive organizations. So unfortunately, whenever people see something that says anti-racism, anti-sexism, against transphobia on the tin, they just go for it because they've kind of been taught, this ideology is marinated over decades to teach people that majorities are bad and fearful, minorities are warm and cuddly, and you've always got to go for the minority that has more oppression points. And that's where we've landed, unfortunately.
It is absolutely extraordinary. I'm fascinated to see where we go with this and how things do change, if at all. What can people who don't sign up to all this and do believe in things like free speech, just very briefly, what can we do?
Well, I just think a lot of this, unfortunately, will have to come through political change. So the pressure is going to have to come from political parties on the right and voters putting pressure on politicians, holding them to account for what they do or don't do on these issues. Now, I think we all have a responsibility in the next 5 years under Labour, let's say, for the media and the public to try and expose what's going on in the institutions.
Just that people even know about it in the first place. Again, people exposing what happened in the Tavistock clinic before the Cass review. Absolutely fascinating to talk to you. I hope you'll come on again. Eric Kaufmann, Professor of Politics at University of Buckingham, also author of the book Taboo: How Making Race Sacred Produced a Cultural Revolution.